Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a topic that honestly has been a bit of a puzzle for centuries. We're talking about Riba.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You have figures like Umar ibn al-Khattab, finding it really complex.
Exactly. And even later scholars like Ibn Kathir mentioned how obscure the chapter on Riba was, and Al-Saati noted its meaning was still kind of ambiguous in his time. It's this historical riddle.
And that ambiguity, I think it points to something deeper. It's not just about a simple rule. It's about understanding these really profound ethical and economic ideas behind it.
Right, which required serious thought, not just learning it by rote.
Mm-hmm.
So that's our mission today. We want to unpack the surprising economic wisdom behind prohibiting riba, often called usury or interest. We're diving into an academic paper by AbdulRahim A, Al-Saati, the Economic Justification for Riba Alfadel and Riba Alnasia.
Right.
And the goal isn't just to know that it's prohibited, but to really get into the why.
Yeah. And this paper, it does a great job pulling together so many different threads. You've got Quranic verses, the prophetic traditions, the Hadith, and then the really detailed analyses from jurists like Ibn Alqayem, Ibn Taymiyyah. And what's really interesting, it connects all that to modern economic thought too, which is, quite rare.
It really builds a bridge. So for you listening, the big picture here is that the prohibition of riba, it's fundamentally about justice, about preventing economic oppression, or Zulm.
It's way more than just a religious rule. It's really an economic principle aiming for a healthier society.
Okay, so let's start with the basics then. We hear riba interest, usury. What exactly is it? Linguistically, it just means increase or growth, right?
It does. But it's obviously more specific in this context. Jurists worked hard to define it. Ibn Kathir, for instance, he described it as an increase on the principal amount of money without a contract of exchange.
Okay, without an exchange.
And Al-Saati called it excess devoid of consideration stipulated in a sale. So the common thread, the paper really points this out, is this idea of unearned surplus.
Unearned surplus. That feels like the key phrase.
It really is. A gain without, a proper justification. No real return or effort involved.
And the paper brings in these three concepts, ilah, hikmah, and maqasid al-sharia, to help unpack the logic. Can you give us a quick rundown on those?
Sure. So ilah, think of that as the direct observable reason for a ruling, the causative factor. For riba, its negative economic impact is a major ilah.
The immediate harm.
Right. Then you have hikmah. That's the broader wisdom, the ultimate goal behind it all, promoting well-being, minimizing harm. It's the deeper why.
Ilah, the cause, hikmah, the purpose.
Got it.
And maqasid.
Maqasid al-sharia. Those are the big overarching objectives of Islamic law itself. Things like preserving justice, life, intellect, wealth. Prohibiting riba fits right in there, especially with preserving wealth and ensuring justice.
It's really powerful how it all loops back to justice. And it seems like it's not just about the individual transaction, is it? It's bigger than that.
Oh, definitely. It's systemic. There's a hadith from Jabir where the Prophet Muhammad condemned everyone involved in a riba transaction.
Every rule.
Yeah, not just the person taking it or giving it, but even the scribe, the witnesses. He said they are all equal. It really shows riba is seen as a societal problem, a harmful system, not just one person doing wrong.
That puts a whole different perspective on it. Okay, so with that foundation, let's focus on the type of riba most people think of today. Riba al-dain, loan riba. This feels like the core issue in modern finance. How's it defined?
Riba al-dain, or sometimes called riba al-Nasi'a, specifically for loans with increases over time, is basically that increase stipulated in a debt. It comes from a loan or maybe a sale where payment is delayed.
Okay.
And the paper shows how classical sources describe things that sound, well, incredibly familiar today.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, you have the obvious one. A loan where they agree on an extra amount up front, simple interest.
Right.
But then Tabari described penalty interest. If you couldn't pay on time, they'd give you an extension, but jack up the amount owed.
Ouch. Sounds familiar.
And a loosey, detailed compound interest where the debt just keeps growing and growing, sometimes consuming everything the borrower owned. Fakhr al-Razi even described periodic interest payments, kind of like modern bond coupons, where you pay interest regularly, but the principal stays the same.
Wow. It's striking how timeless those financial mechanics are. It sounds almost like, Keynes defining interest as the price for using scarce liquidity.
The paper definitely makes that connection. These economic insights from centuries ago are still so relevant.
And there's a strong consensus, right, that this riba al-dain is what the Quran was primarily getting at, calling it jahiliya riba.
Yes, very strong. Jassas, Ibn Alqayem, Ibn Hanbal, they all emphasized this fundamental prohibition.
But the paper mentioned something curious, that many classical fiqh books didn't actually spend a ton of time detailing loan riba compared to sales riba. Why would that be?
That's a really interesting observation. It might be because it was considered so obviously unjust, so fundamentally wrong, according to their worldview,
Yeah.
that it didn't need the same level of detailed legal breakdown as, say, the trickier issues in sales riba. Its prohibition was just foundational.
Assumed knowledge, almost.
Yeah.
So looking at the big picture, what's the actual economic damage this kind of riba can cause?
Well, the paper points out that loan riba doesn't always fund real production. It can just be for speculation or, managing liquidity.
Okay.
But even when it is used for production, there's this unjust transfer of value.
Right.
The borrower takes all the risk of the actual project failing,
Right.
while the lender gets a guaranteed return on their principal. It violates that basic economic principle.
Right.
Profit should come with liability. Al-Kharaj be al-Daman.
So guaranteed return, zero risk for the lender. That seems inherently unstable.
It often is. When you detach lending from real economic activity, you can end up with this inverted pyramid of debt, as the paper calls it.
An inverted pyramid.
Yeah, where the total amount of borrowed money vastly outweighs the real assets underneath it, or even the whole country's GDP. The paper mentions the 2008 U.S. situation debt was 3 times GDP, 60 times bank capital.
60 times. That's staggering. That can't hold.
Exactly. It's fundamentally unsustainable. And the consequences. Debt crises, recessions, poverty, unemployment, it cascades through society.
You can see why the Quran warns against consuming interest multiplied many times over. It captures that snowballing effect.
Perfectly. It describes that exponential destructive growth.
And how do these things usually unravel in the real world?
Well, often through painful measures like debt write-offs or through inflation. Inflation quietly eats away at the real value of the loans. Real interest rates can even become negative.
So it's almost like the system self-corrects violently.
In a way, it resonates with that Quranic verse, Allah destroys interest. It speaks to the inherent instability of systems built purely on interest without shared risk.
So boiling it down, the economic ilah, the core reason for prohibiting riba al-dain is that unearned surplus.
Exactly. It's a pre-agreed, guaranteed monetary increase tied only to time passing on a principal amount that's also guaranteed, with the lender taking none of the actual risk of the venture. That's the fundamental injustice.
Okay, that really clarifies the economic argument against loan interest. Now, this brings us to the thing being loaned or exchanged money itself. What exactly is money? The paper argues it's not static.
Right at all. It's an economic institution, something that's evolved massively with human societies. The key point is anything that performs the functions of money can be money.
So it's not just about gold and silver.
Definitely not. That challenges the old idea that only things with intrinsic value could work.
So what are those characteristics? What makes something function as money?
Generally, you need a few things. It needs to be widely accepted by people. It should come in standard, homogeneous units. There needs to be a suitable quantity available, not too much, not too little. It should be easily divisible.
So you can make change.
Right. Lightweight, portable, and importantly, it needs to be a reasonable store of value over time. These are the practical things that let money do its job.
And what is that job? What are money's core functions?
Okay, 4 main ones. First, it's a measure of value. Scholars like Ibn al-Arabi, Ibn Taymiyyah, Al-Ghazali, they all pointed this out. It's the yardstick we use to compare the value of different goods and services.
A common denominator.
Precisely. Second, it's a medium of exchange. This is huge. It makes trade so much easier, reduces transaction costs, as Ibn Humam noted, no more complex bartering.
Just swap goods for money, money for goods, much simpler.
Much simpler. Third, it's a store of value. This lets you separate selling something from buying something else later. Ibn Khaldun talked about gold and silver storing wealth, but importantly not hoarding it, just holding purchasing power.
Holding value for future use. Makes sense.
And fourth, it's a standard for deferred payments. It's the unit we use for debts that will be paid back later.
Yeah.
For this to work well, as Ibn Alqayem stressed, the value of money needs to be relatively stable.
Okay. Measure, medium, store, standard. This really maps onto the evolution of money, doesn't it? From commodities to, well, what we use now.
It does. Historically, commodity money wasn't just gold and silver. Critically, it included those 6 items from the famous Hadith: wheat, barley, dates, salt.
Right. You mentioned those earlier.
Because in their time and place, they met many of money's characteristics. They were useful, generally accepted, measurable. They functioned as money.
Wheat and barley were literally money. That's still fascinating.
It really shifts your perspective. Then we evolve towards fiduciary or credit money, paper notes, digital balances. Their value isn't intrinsic. It comes from trust, from their purchasing power.
Trust in the system, essentially.
Exactly. And the paper mentions Umar ibn al-Khattab even considering using camel hides. And Ibn Taymiyyah's point that money is just a means, not an end in itself.
So the physical form isn't the main point.
Not at all. Which leads to this really crucial conclusion from Ibn Mani, later adopted by Islamic councils. Riba rules apply to all forms of money. Why? Because of their moneyness, their Althamania. Their function is what matters.
Their function as money, regardless of what they're made of, that's a key link.
The very key link.
And that link, that idea of moneyness, brings us straight to riba al-buyu, or sales riba. This seems to be about ensuring fairness in actual market exchanges.
That's right. Riba al-buyu is defined as that increase of one of the two substitutes over the other in the sale of ribawi commodities. Those specific commodities where riba rules apply in sales.
And it comes in two main types.
Yes. First, you have riba al-Fadl. That's the riba of excess. It happens in an immediate hand-to-hand exchange of the same type of ribawi good, where one person gets more quantity or weight than the other.
Like your earlier example, 100 grams of gold for 110 grams of gold, right there and then.
Exactly. That extra 10 grams is riba al-Fadl. It's seen as an unearned surplus because you're trading the exact same thing for the exact same thing, just unequal amounts. There's no justification for the difference.
No value added, no difference in kind, just more.
Just more. The second type is riba al-Nasi'a, but here it's specifically riba of delay in sales. This involves a delay in delivering one or both of the items being exchanged, especially if they're the same type or similar types that should be exchanged immediately, and often involves unequal quantities too.
Ah, okay. So this is where that famous Hadith from Ebada ibn Alsamit really comes into play.
It's central. The key part everyone remembers is gold for gold, silver for silver, wheat for wheat, barley for barley, dates for dates, salt for salt, like for like, hand to hand.
Like for like, hand to hand.
If these types differ, then sell as you wish if it is hand to hand.
So those two conditions, like for like and hand to hand, are crucial for those 6 items.
Absolutely. Like for like is ultimatul, meaning equality in measure or weight when the items are the same type. And hand to hand is al-takabud, meaning immediacy of exchange.
So what's the economic thinking behind these very specific rules for sales? Why regulate the exchange of dates or salt so strictly?
It comes right back to what we just discussed about money. The core economic rationale is that these 6 items, gold, silver, wheat, barley, dates, salt, weren't just goods. They were also functioning as commodity money in their contexts.
Their moneyness is the key again.
It absolutely is. So the rule against riba al-Fadl, excess, is there to prevent an unjust surplus when you're essentially trading money for the same money. If 100 grams of gold is functionally the same as 100 grams of gold, getting 110 back immediately has no economic basis. It's pure unearned gain.
Makes sense when you see them as money. And riba al-Nasi'a in sales, the delay part.
That's designed specifically to block disguised loans. If you arrange a sale of, say, wheat for wheat, but delay delivery and increase the amount, you've essentially created an interest-bearing loan hidden within a sales contract.
Ah, using trade as a cover for riba.
Exactly. And the Quran, chapter 2, verse 275, explicitly calls this out. They said, trade is only like interest. But Allah has permitted trade and forbidden interest. These sales rules ensure that trade stays trade and doesn't become a loophole for forbidden interest-based lending.
So it's not anti-trade at all. Trade is encouraged. It's about keeping the financing aspect within trade fair and just.
Precisely. It ensures that any gain comes from genuine trade, risk, or effort, not from merely manipulating exchanges of money-like commodities or introducing unjustified delays with increases.
Okay, this really leads us to the unifying economic justification the paper argues for. It sounds like the common factor across all riba prohibitions, especially in sales, is this idea of the items having the characteristics of commodity money.
That's the core argument. When you analyze the different legal reasonings, the illah, proposed by various schools of thought for riba al-Fadl,
Like the Hanafis on quantity and genus, or Shafis on edibility or moneyness.
Right. They all, whether directly or indirectly, seem to point towards the commodity's function as money. It's moneyness as the underlying reason.
So different paths, same destination, recognizing the monetary function.
Pretty much. If something works like money generally accepted, measurable, a medium of exchange, then trading it for itself in unequal amounts immediately is unjust. There's no economic value justifying the difference.
Okay. And how does this moneyness apply as the ilah for Riba on Nasi'a, the delay element in both loans and sales?
It's central there, too. The ilah is seen as moneyness, nadia, combined with being the same type, taj answers, or at least similar types tashabu, that function similarly as mediums or stores of value.
And the delay itself?
The key insight there is that time inherently affects the value or utility of money. Cash now is more useful than the promise of cash later. Imam Shafi'i made this point about immediate versus deferred value.
Time value of money in a sense, but viewed differently.
Exactly. Any increase demanded purely because of that delay, what Ibn Taymiyyah called the share of the price taken by delay, is considered an unearned gain. It's profiting from time itself, not from productive activity or risk.
Which is why that immediate exchange, takabu, is insisted upon for these money-like items, even if they're slightly different, like gold for silver or wheat for barley, to stop it becoming a loan with hidden interest?
Precisely. It prevents the transaction from morphing into a debt with a time-based increase. So the paper's main thrust is that the Riba rules, especially in sales, are about ensuring justice when dealing with things that act like money. They block unearned gains from unequal quantity, Fadl, and from delay that functions like interest, Nasi'a. It's all about fair value exchange.
That is a really powerful unifying framework. This whole deep dive really underscores that Riba's prohibition isn't arbitrary. It's deeply embedded in principles of economic justice, preventing oppression, ensuring fairness.
It's about making sure value is matched by real consideration, effort, risk, genuine exchange, not just by exploiting a need for liquidity or the simple passage of time.
It forces you to scrutinize transactions. Is real value being created and fairly exchanged, or is it just an extraction of wealth without corresponding risk or input?
That's the core question it raises.
And maybe that's the thought to leave everyone with today. How do these ancient economic principles, focusing so intensely on fairness, risk-sharing, and real value, challenge how we think about modern finance, about wealth creation, about what money even is in a world filled with abstract financial instruments? What might a truly just financial system look like if we took these principles seriously?